CNN reporter Oliver Darcy was reportedly scolded by his boss, Chris Licht, the network's chairman and CEO, over his critical reporting on the Trump town hall last week. This according to Puck News' Dylan Myers. Licht and other executives reportedly told Darcy that his reporting had been too emotional and then emphasized the importance of being dispassionate. The night after the town hall, Darcy opened his newsletter with, quote, "It's hard to see how America was served by the spectacle of lies that aired on CNN Wednesday evening." He added, "Caitlin Collins is as tough and knowledgeable of an interviewer as they come, but according to Mediaite, Darcy's overall analysis of the town hall was quite critical of the network." According to Byers on Thursday, Licht said in a morning meeting that he, quote, "absolutely unequivocally believed, quote, America was served very well by what we did last night." Byers reported that two sources who heard about the meeting said Darcy was visibly shaken. Byers also reported that another source said, quote, "they put the fear of God into him." According to The Hill's reporting, one prominent on-air figure at CNN gave their opinion about the town hall, writing, "It was a total debacle, and I've never been more ashamed to work at CNN." Liz, what do you make of this? Is this the thing that would make you historically ashamed to work at CNN?
I think I would probably be semi-ashamed to work at CNN for various other reasons. But no, I mean, Caitlin Collins basically had an impossible job with hosting the Trump town hall. She needed to push back on Trump's fabulous claims and some of the things that he continues to fixate on, like the fact that the election was purportedly stolen from him, even though we have no evidence to establish that that is the case. So she really had an impossible task before her, and I think she did as decent of a job as she could under those circumstances. Watching, on-air personalities or prominent figures at, major newsrooms melt down is sort of par for the course these days. We've seen a lot of this over the last 5 years. And I at least appreciate that Darcy didn't totally throw his colleague under the bus, but there's also a certain amount of have some decorum, have some professionalism. The network will absolutely do things you disagree with. How is this in any way surprising?
Does Darcy have a point that, given how difficult a task was before Caitlin Collins, that the network should have been more prepared to address Trump's rather predictable behavior? So I would agree that it's a very difficult challenge, and I'm reluctant to pile on to Collins. However, we've been through this rodeo before. We've been through both the 2016 and 2020 cycles. And at a certain point, folks in this position of moderating debates and the like realize that because Trump doesn't hesitate to spin his own version of the truth about things, that you need to be able to impeach him, as it were, with his own statements, with audio of him saying things, with audio of other people saying things, in a way that can start to break through the he said, she said of these moments that come up whenever Trump is confronted with something that is politically unpopular. And given that there are strategies that can be deployed to make these kind of events go better, is Darcy on some level correct that CNN was negligent in its handling of this event?
Well, what do you think Collins should have specifically done differently, or what do you think CNN should have done differently in this situation?
I think, for one, as I mentioned, having audio recordings that Trump has to respond to. So if he says it's a perfect call, if he says he never requested votes from Raffensperger in Georgia, play the tape, and at very least that's on the record for the audience to hear for itself. Another thing, in addition to having more quotes and audio recordings to cite to Trump directly, is the choice to have the audience comprised of Trump voters the way it was. I get the idea that as a town hall, it's good to have Trump voters ask questions that they care about. At the same time, it created the impression that there's a lot more broad public consensus for some of the things that Trump said that there is no actual public consensus around, like election denialism, for instance. So those are just two things right off the top of my head that CNN could have done differently that maybe they should get blamed for.
Are there topics that you think Caitlin Collins was soft on specifically? Because I was listening to some of her pushback about stolen election claims and Brad Raffensperger, and then I was listening a little bit to some of the January 6th content, and I was pretty impressed by the way she handled those things. But were there specific topics where you think she gave him softballs?
It's not that it's softballs. It's that it doesn't matter what Caitlin Collins says if Donald Trump says, "No, I didn't. You're lying. You're a nasty woman." But you have to figure out.
I think to some degree she seemed to prepare quite well for it, and I credit some of the CNN producers for this as well, in terms of she basically in real time was doing some pretty aggressive fact checking where he would say, no, like, so and so in this state, said that the lots of people were submitting 7 votes, 15 votes, whatever, and she was saying, no, like, look, we have this on the record from Georgia, and they investigated that, and there was literally no evidence of that. Like, at a certain point, what more is there to do? The people who legitimately believe Trump's, substanceless, like baseless lies will continue to believe that. And I'm not sure that any amount of fact checking or pushback or even audio recordings directly contradicting that will change that.
Well,
and
that's a critique in and of
I'm
itself.
dissatisfied with that.
That's a critique in and of itself. CNN also had to make a decision about what its goals were here. And it seemed like it was asking questions, even though it was framed as a Republican town hall, a Trump town hall with a Trump audience. They were not asking questions that I believe a Trump audience is very invested in. And in fact, when there were these these post-town hall polls or focus groups with potential Trump voters, undecided voters or what have you, they didn't uniformly say that they believed Trump in his election denial claims, but they felt that Caitlin's focus on it being the first question and it taking up a significant chunk of the first part of the debate, of the first part of the town hall, demonstrated that she was more interested in kind of pinning Trump down and nailing Trump and criticizing Trump and setting Trump up for failure, as opposed to being a good faith actor who was trying to elicit what Trump would be willing to do for the working people of this country. Now, you don't have to agree with that, but that was the perception that was driven by the choice to focus on that kind of an issue for so much of the debate.
I think that's a fair critique, and we know this as journalists, right? There are editorial decisions, that are indicated by the specific questions that you ask and the specific order in which you ask them. Those are editorial decisions. Those are deliberately chosen. There's an interesting, it's an innately weird task because CNN's viewership is most likely extremely antagonistic to Trump voters and extremely, filled with disdain for Trump. And yet it was bizarre for them to basically populate the town hall with Trump voters. And so in a sense, it's like they're almost attempting to make TV for multiple audiences, but not really quite knowing how to approach that. They had the people sitting in the town hall actually present in, I guess, was it in New Hampshire, I believe? And then they had their viewers sitting at home, probably throwing popcorn out of rage at the TV. And so you have a little bit of this strange dynamic here. But my question is, what is the appropriate formula here? I think Oliver Darcy's critiques were not super specific, and so that's a little bit frustrating. And I think there was a lot more hysterics about the very platforming of Trump at all. And I saw this from a lot of the sort of media class, this idea of why are we platforming this person? And I've always been much more in the camp of we need to allow our sources the rope with which they can choose to hang themselves, figuratively speaking. It is important to allow people to make their case and to be sort of free speech maximalists about this and to platform powerful people who are attempting to amass more power and allow viewers to make that decision for themselves as to whether or not they want to support those people. But my question is, what is the actual appropriate formula, and has any network figured out the best way to handle this? Because I certainly don't think Fox has.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you that the no platforming arguments are a little silly, but I also think that when you do make this kind of decision, you have to do so responsibly and have a clear idea of what you actually want to get out of this. And I think you're completely right that the messaging was confused in part by having these two audiences that they couldn't decide who to cater to. I also happen to believe that there are questions that all Americans, especially poor and working class Americans, are invested in that aren't bipartisan, and that all Americans should be invested in knowing what Trump is actually going to do to bring down inflation, how he actually thinks that Biden's policies are driving inflation and not just kind of saying Biden's in office and this is what you have to do. What is Trump going to actually do to resolve the border crisis? Is he going to be challenged on the efficacy of whether the wall is actually having the results that he claims that it's going to have? Whether or not he's actually going to cut funding to the war in Ukraine or cut Biden's military budget, generally speaking, which he seemed to decline to do when it was touched upon at the town hall, but it wasn't really followed up on. So I would argue that having a broader populist framing would kind of cut through the middle and make it a much more productive, substantive, policy-driven conversation, as opposed to the kind of cultural back and forth and the point scoring that ended up happening last week. But I'm really curious to see what the audience has to say about this, what they think would have made a more productive debate, or whether they thought the town hall at the end of the day was really effective. I look forward to reading those in the comments, and we'll have them rising for you right after this.